6. The next 3 days were spent in directed activity. Not only had the survivors discovered a source of possible nourishment in the lush vegetation, but they had also established the possibility of a sapient life form on the planet. The human-like cry from the animal encountered that first afternoon remained a mystery, however. None of the survivors had encountered the animal since, although some of the patrols had seen tracks. The markings were those of a gigantic bird, which seemed to indicate the distinct possibility of two different animals. There were the ones who sounded like humans, and the ones shaped like birds. The food problem was partially solved by a thorough examination of the forest and some tentative experimentation. The examination revealed that some of the fruits had been partially eaten. Based on the theory that a human should be able to eat the same food that doesn't kill other beings, Takuda decided to taste the fruits in hopes of encouraging the others to do so. He chose a large, smooth-skinned yellow one and consumed all but the greasy gray seeds. The others watched and waited, and when they saw that Takuda survived to see the next morning, the rest also ate of the yellow fruit. A feeling of tension continued to exist just below the surface of activity and sense of accomplishment. The mercenaries and the desk members became even more suspicious of one another, but splits were beginning to occur along other lines as well. Garber Vost watched the members of his mercenary lance as they lounged around the camp area. He was mildly amused at how their various attitudes towards life were reflected in the way they maintained their own kits. As was to be expected, Brian Seagroves, the lamb pilot, had the most sumptuous area. Brian liked things, especially those things money could buy. He'd been the toughest negotiator when Vost was forming the lance, perfectly willing to hold out to prove how much more valuable he was than any other member of the lance. He had also insisted on being paid most of his money up front, sea bills which he spent on pretty toys. His sleeping bag bore the label of a prominent outfitter on New Samarkand, a name recognized throughout the inner sphere. So did his hiking boots, combat vest, and cooking utensils. They marked him as a man who had money, and who knew how to spend it. He'd also managed to buy an additional mosquito net and frame from Kendall Pesht. Now his area had taken on an air of safari opulence. Pesht, on the other hand, lived in the open air. Now that he had sold his mosquito net, his sleeping area was the only one unprotected from the swarms of famished insects that invaded the camp at night. The result was that he had to huddle inside his flimsy bag the entire time, but his face showed where his efforts were not totally successful. Pesht, the javelin pilot, wanted to be everyone's friend. He was like a small dog, yapping and scampering around the feet of the people who really mattered. He was especially that way with Vost, who used him as a tool when necessary. The man had probably sold his mosquito net to Seagroves to curry favor, but Vost knew Brian would not remember it as a favor. Pesht had lost the net with no advantage gained. Collis Brank, one of the Locust pilots, was a schemer. The man always had some plan in the works, mostly nefarious, but he could be counted on to rat on anyone else if it were to his advantage. Brank was an excellent source of information about what was going on in the lance, and Vost was careful to always reward the information with favors. Holly Goodall was the last Locust pilot. She was a dangerous one within the lance, even though hers was a light mech that posed no threat to Vost's control. She was such a directed wench. She kept her mech in perfect trim and was always trying to upgrade the various systems. That would have been fine if she were a man, but it was strange in a woman. Vost was a little sensitive about women mech warriors in general, and Goodall only reinforced that feeling. He had let her join the lance purely to fill out the ranks with the mechs required by the contract. She was so tough. Most of the time she dressed in her mech warrior's vest and shorts, skimpy attire that always created a tumultuous stirring in him. It was a good thing he had Michelle Guardine as one of his techs. He needed something to relieve the tension. By and large, Sagiri Johnson had chosen a competent body of technical people. Johnson had been with Vost for 2 years, the only other survivor of Vost's first lance. Underos Yapudi and Ilimoso Panda, despite a tendency to gripe at times, would do as they were told. The other techs, Tammy Wilson and Fiona Sabine, were too smart to be good stooges. Not only that, but they were showing a tendency to listen to Goodall. Vost flexed his shoulders under his combat vest and ran his hand through his thick, sandy-colored hair. He'd be able to deal with those two when the time came. He always had been. Vost waved nonchalantly toward Collis Brank, who jumped to his feet and sidled over to where Yost was standing. The Locust pilot always sidled, then always hovered close enough to talk in whispers, even when it wasn't required. "What's the skinny?" he asked in a hoarse whisper as he sidled up to Vost. Vost stepped back to put a little space between him and the hunched figure. "Just wanted to talk," replied Vost. "Just wanted to see how you were getting along. You generally know the skinny before I do." "I don't like the attitudes of these desk guys. They want to run the whole show." "Of course. Combine troops always think they're supposed to be in charge. But I'd be a little careful about saying bad things about Dest. They have a reputation, and even if it is overblown, it's close enough to the truth." "They're not superhumans," whined the little man. "They may not be superhuman," Vost said. "They're still damn good. Be careful what you say. Be careful what you think when you're around them." There were a few moments of silence between the two men. Vost let Brank do his own thinking for a while, waiting for the little man to come up with the right answer. "They've got all the weapons right now," Brank said finally. "We have our sidearms, but all the heavy firepower is theirs. That's too bad." "Too bad we don't have the mechs out," Vost said with the barest pause. "That would change things. Then we'd be in charge, and they'd have to dance to our tune." "Ought to be in charge anyway," interjected Brank. "They don't really have anything to do now. There's no one around to fight." "That's not what they'd say. Who knows if this bit about human-like aliens and giant birds in the forest isn't designed to scare us and make them important? Except for worrying about that, what do they really have to do? Takuda sits there like some dictator, telling us we have to prepare to defend ourselves. Defend ourselves from what? What we really need to do is get our lives organized. We've got to figure out how we're going to survive. And you know what survival means." Frank had no idea what survival meant, except for more food and a place to live. He knew that Vost was expecting an answer, and that the answer should be profound, but he just couldn't think of anything. All he could do was hum in acquiescence and hope that Vost would give him a clue. Luckily for his stalled thinking process, Holly Goodall took this opportunity to stroll across his field of vision. That triggered a response. "The women?" It was almost a question. "You got that right." Vost was quick to take the lead. "We've got to deal out the women. If we're going to survive, there has to be someone to carry on. We've got to divide up the women." "But there are only 4 of them?" It was almost a whine. Frank was making a quick survey to see if he would get one, and if he did, which one it would be. "You're forgetting the 2 with Dest." "The Major won't like that. He would have something to say about it." "Not if the mechs were out, he wouldn't. We'd get the women over his dead body, and that could be arranged." Vost gave Brank a meaningful glance and was rewarded with a sly grin. "Those 2 over there are in top physical condition. They'd also probably snap the necks of any men who looked cross-eyed at them. But it could be fun trying to tame them. I bet you would have quite a time with one of them, don't you? Sho saw Yubari Takuda watch the two mech pilots deep in conversation. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could guess. The whole situation was uncomfortable for him. Trying to be the ultimate leader was something Takuda had never had to deal with. He didn't want to be the ultimate, but he saw no alternative. Vost certainly wanted to be top dog, but Takuda didn't believe the man would represent the best interests of the whole group. As for Reston Bannon, he was a dead loss. The man hadn't done a thing since they'd left the jump ship. That left Parker Davood, but Takuda suspected that the dropship pilot would resist any attempt to make him the leader. That left the job to Takuda. As long as the DEST members remained cohesive, he would remain in charge. But this situation was as new to them as to the others, so he couldn't be sure what they would do. DEST members were chosen because they were intelligent, not because they followed orders blindly. Sooner or later, each one would make up his own mind about the situation. Takuda didn't want to be a dictator. He believed that a benevolent autocracy was the best form of government. Wasn't that why it was the form of government in the Draconis Combine? Johann Miranda, the junior member of the weapons team, rose from the grass nearby and approached Takuda. He stopped at a respectful distance and waited for his commander to acknowledge his presence. Takuda wondered mildly how long that deference would last. He nodded to the Johto Hai to approach. "Most Honorable Shosa," said Miranda, bowing ever so slightly at the waist. The sergeant was carrying his sniper rifle. Equipped with a low-light scope and aural sensors, it was said that the weapon could see a gnat at 100 meters. Miranda was a very good shot with the rifle. He couldn't have become a member of DEST otherwise, and Takuda knew that Miranda was good even by DEST standards. "Speak, Rotohai Miranda." "Perhaps I could be of some assistance." The young sergeant glanced toward the pair of mech pilots still standing near their camp. For a moment, Takuda feared that the sergeant was going to suggest some target practice. That might temporarily solve some of their problems, but if they resorted to solving problems by assassination, the whole camp could become crisscrossed with gunfire. "Speak." "I have been scanning the camp for sound, and there are some interesting events." Miranda paused to see if he could continue. When Takuda made no comment, he went on. "Someone has mentioned deploying the mechs from the dropship." Takuda noticed that the Johto Hai did not reveal who had said it or where he had heard the information. The major nodded. "Thank you for the information, Johto Hai. I will ponder it. You are dismissed." The sergeant made another shallow bow and returned to his position in the grass. "Ocho," said Takuda. The call was not a shout, but Takuda had trained his voice to carry when necessary. The young sergeant major rose from his position some 50 meters away and hurried to his commander. "Socho," said Takuda when the sergeant came to attention before him. "There is some possibility that the dropship may be in danger. See to it that a guard is placed on the ship." The sergeant major saluted, did a smart about face, and went off to talk to the members of the nearest DEST section.